I'd like to share some thoughts on the modern economic system. So hopefully you ate your breakfast this morning, your brain's working. This is a pertinent topic, especially with all this interest in crypto today. I had, it's the end of January 2025, and I fielded some questions and had some conversations with a few friends this week with you were probably closer to normal Gen X type people as far as their exposure to modern economic ideas, which are more popular with the younger generation. So they were asking me questions about crypto and everything. So I figured maybe it's a good time to share some of these ideas, which I've been stockpiling for a while. But before we get into this, I want to make some disclaimers. I'm going to say some things that are pretty negative about modern investment options, if you want to call them that. But I want to be clear, I'm not telling you not to, first off, I'm not giving you investment advice at all. The only investment advice I have is find out what Jesus would do in your place and do it. And that's the best investment you can make. The particulars of that are both up to you and uniquely your responsibility. The decisions you make will determine where you end up. And so you're the one that's on the hook for that. So you have to figure it out. But anyway, and as far as particulars go, specifics, I'm not saying don't invest in the stock market. I'm not saying don't invest in crypto. I'm not saying I wouldn't do those things. I'm not saying that the Lord wouldn't do those things. I'm certainly not saying that there aren't people who are making tons of money by doing those things. And this is definitely not a prosperity gospel pitch. I'm not saying if you live the gospel, you will get or stay rich. The Lord said a lot about that particular part. And actually, we're not even going to talk about that a whole ton in this presentation. We're keeping it focused on some other things. Namely, I'm telling you that as the economy becomes increasingly unjust, you're going to have to increasingly choose and intentionally choose to live by the principles of justice, of God's justice. And you're going to have to discover what those are. You're going to have to realize that the battle is not the war. You're going to have to make specific decisions knowing full well that they're not long-term optimal, but that long-term optimality requires this short-term decision. That's the battle versus the war. And basically what this situation looks like is a steamroller rolling down the street. And imagine a handful of change out in front of it. And modern life requires you to go and pick up that money. But you need to know what that steamroller is. You need to know where you are relative to it, how fast it's moving. And in this case, a normal steamroller just has a set speed and it moves pretty slowly. It's a big, heavy thing. But in this case, in terms of the modern economy, this thing lurches forward. So there's really no amount of money that's worth grabbing at that's right by the steamroller, because that thing, even if it looks like it's moving slowly, it could lurch forward and run you over. And we'll learn later in this presentation why that kind of life, not only is it bad to get run over by a steamroller, but in terms of how this analogy applies today, living that way makes you least prepared to get run over by a steamroller. There are ways to live where you have deep meaning and purpose that will, if you do get run over by a steamroller, it will actually lead to the best possible result of that, because it doesn't have to crush you. Anyway, so what's modern wealth like? It's like a lottery. So not only do most ways of getting highly wealthy today require you to make bets that are very bad bets, but this is increasingly spreading out from just ultra wealthy paths. So it's becoming the case that increasingly that just a normal middle class life requires you to make very risky decisions. And very dangerous decisions. that wasn't the case in the past. But this is an outcome that stems from the fact that our money is fake, and the value of the dollar just continually crashes every day. It's less than it was before. So to help you understand this, I want to talk a little bit about the game of roulette. So roulette is a spinning wheel, and it's got black squares and red squares, and there are numbers, and you can place different bets. But 50% of the places the marble can land are red, and 50% of the places the marble can land are black. And so one of the bets you can make is on whether it will land on a red or black space. And so there's a 50% chance for either of those outcomes. I saw a video, people have done this. People have bet massive sums of money on red or black. I saw a video where a guy actually sold his house and went to a casino and put it all, I don't remember if it was on red or black, but who did this bet. Now let me ask you, why would a casino allow you to make this bet? So anytime you're making a bet in a casino, realize that the only reason a casino allows you to be there and betting in the ways it allows in the games is because over the long term, the house always wins. Now that doesn't mean that there won't be a specific case where a specific person will not come out ahead. People do win. When they make bets in a casino, there are winners. But if you look at the long term, whether it's across all people or if that person keeps betting, even if they won big, if they keep betting, they will lose. The house always wins. That's what you have to remember, okay? So here we go with some math. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully you ate breakfast. The first time you bet everything on red, there's a 50% chance of winning. The second time you bet, there's also a 50% chance of winning. So say you win, and I don't know what the return is, but let's say they double your money. Okay? Hey, so you walk in there with $100,000, you put it all on red, you just doubled your money. That's an enormous gain. Like, let's say that $100,000 is your life savings. You scraped and saved, and you worked your crummy job that you don't like, and you ate beans and rice every day to save that money, and you just doubled it. You have just doubled, because you didn't really do much to do that. You just doubled the value that you find in all the things you had to sacrifice to get there. You just doubled it. That's what happens psychologically. Okay, in this situation. Then you bet it all again. And you're hoping you're going to double it again, and now you're fourfold in the value, right? Over what it was before, if you win. But what are the odds of winning? What are the odds of betting it all on red twice in a row and winning? It's not 50%. Each time's 50%. But the math on this, you have to multiply those probabilities. So what's half of 50%? It's 25%. There's a 75% chance that you will lose everything if you bet twice. What about 3 times in a row? That math gets a little harder. 4 times, 5 times. Each time you cut it in half. The odds of winning over all of those, you cut it in half from the time before, right? And the odds of losing go to very close to 100% very quickly. In the modern economy, you increasingly have to make bets like this in order to come out not just wealthy, but to come out normal. You have to make very risky bets. And I'm not just talking about financial bets, although that's the specific focus of this presentation. You know, getting married is a very risky bet, and it's an increasingly dangerous bet to make with each passing day because of all the societal changes. Even asking someone out is getting pretty dang dangerous. because of the false accusations that can occur and increasingly do occur. You know, what job you choose is a risky decision, and it's becoming more dangerous. So we could go on about this, but that's the pattern. This roulette principle is something you have to think about. Okay, so anything you can do to move away from the big, dangerous bets and to focus on ones that have a much higher return, probabilistically, the net benefit, the net expected benefit is much higher. That's a good thing to find those things and focus on those, right? So we're going to talk about that here. Now, just so you know, I'm not making all this stuff up. Here's a quote from the OpenAI scammer, Sam Altman. This guy, he tricked a bunch of people, including Elon Musk, into thinking that he was starting a nonprofit to produce AI for everybody. And then he decided to actually make it a private business after it started to get a lot of traction. And this weasel said, "The most successful people I know believe in themselves almost to the point of delusion." And this is true today. It's true today. It's been true for a while, but this is a feature of modern society, modern monetary policy, actually. And we'll get to that. Okay, people who are entrepreneurs today are not rational people. They believe in themselves to the point of delusion. Why? Because almost every startup will fail. And most of the ones that succeed don't actually result in the kind of benefit for the founder that would make their sacrifice worthwhile. It just benefits the investors. And I won't get into the weeds on explaining all of this, but it's true. The unicorns you see, the Zuckerbergs, the Altmans, the Musks, these are people who put everything on red 10 times in a row and won 10 times in a row. The Bezos, what they have been paid for, if you had to boil it down to one thing, is not their merit. Even Elon Musk, who has solved all of these impossible problems, or Steve Jobs, who managed to collect and lead teams that did incredible things. If you had to boil it down to one thing that caused all that to happen, it wasn't merit. It was their willingness to bet everything over and over again, which was irrational. That's not something that everyone should do. It helps everyone that there are people crazy enough to do it. And most of them are motivated by this lottery payout that's, statistically speaking, they are not going to get. And we all win because they're willing to do things like that to an extent, if the products they make are actually good and useful. But it's very irrational for a person to do that. Now, here's where, again, it's a feature of modern economics. Here's where this roulette principle falls apart, because in the modern world, and this is an aspect of the injustice in the modern system, in the modern world, one of the reasons that people like Elon Musk exist, and you know about him, is because modern entrepreneurship becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once someone has won the lottery, if they play again, I'm talking about the literal lottery, if you play again, your odds of winning are as low as everyone else. But with successful entrepreneurs, the money will flow to you more easily. Investors line up against entrepreneurs who've already gone public with one company or sold a company profitably. Investors will throw money at you. But you'll also get press. And between the money and the press, your odds of winning go up by a lot, because that money is needed and the press is needed and customers will come to you. You'll get news articles and things. You'll get notoriety, right? And so it becomes easier to build a company once you've had one successful one. It's much more likely you can do it again. But it's not because of merit. Now, is there an aspect of merit? Sure. Like if you can successfully run one company and you've figured out the challenges of that, is it easier to do it again? Absolutely. But the odds are so low. And so many of those things lie outside of your power. Like making a product market fit. It's almost black magic, right? It's so hard to do that. Hard's not the word. It's a complex system that's beyond discovery. The only way to find it out is to do it. And doing it is going to cost millions of dollars and years of time. So I've gotten bogged down on this slide, but there are a lot of ideas wound into this, right? So modern prosperity is different than historical prosperity. So my question is why? And here's my joke for you. It's a baby making joke, which I think we're going to come back to again later in this presentation. So there might be 2 baby making jokes. Where does modern prosperity come from? Well, when an oil well and a money printer love each other very much, that's the answer. We live in a time of unprecedented cheap energy and unprecedented debt. And if you look at any aspect of modern prosperity and you drew a pie chart of where does it come from, it's not some brilliant inventor. It's not some newfangled discovery. Almost all of the pie chart will be because of coal, oil, and printed money. And that's relatively new. And like I've already said, it's unprecedented. The amount of resources we have, it's unprecedented. And what it does is it drives a disconnect between reality and what we have in our modern world. What do I mean by that? Well, just these ideas we could spend a lot of time talking through. And so I'm only barely touching the surface here. But basically everything in your life, from the food you eat, to the convenience you enjoy, to the car you drive, to the toilet that you flush, everything, you need to look at that and say, people historically did not have these things through all history, right? What do you do personally that entitles you to that degree of wealth versus the historic norm? And the answer, rounded to the next nearest truth for everyone, is nothing. You don't do anything to deserve any of those things. You might say, but I go to work every day and I do this and even from before, the guy who's eating beans and rice to save some extra money and invest it. Still, rounded to the next nearest truth, that is blatantly insignificant compared to the difference between the historic norm and modern wealth. The fact that you can eat beans and rice and save money and invest the difference, and you still have a place to live and all these other things. Do you see? So what happens is this prosperity is so disconnected from cause and effect that it softens the consequences of really bad ideas. What do I mean by that? Here's an example. Suppose that you're a parent and you have a child who's 27. And that child lives with you. And that child's getting a gender studies degree. And that child's spending, let's say it's a girl, spending her summers backpacking Europe. That child has never had a job. The child has her own car. She's got a cell phone. She's got a computer. That child is disconnected from reality. And how is that possible? Who makes it possible? Well, you do. how can you afford to fund her lavish lifestyle? Well, through funding money. It's because you have tons of money, and how can you say that you don't deserve what you have? How could I say that? Well, you clearly don't have the wisdom that comes with that money, which means you got it in a way that you don't deserve. You are disconnected from reality, and now you're perpetuating an even bigger disconnect in your daughter. You see how that works? And it cascades, and it corrodes society. The whole thing's corrupted from the head to the toe. Here is a graph. These are histograms of, if you imagine people, and you're measuring them by their merit versus how much money they make. Now, we don't have to dive deeply into what we mean by merit, but let's just simplify it and say people who work smart and hard. We will talk some about particulars a little later. The top graph would be a just system, a system where justice is in play. And what happens is the more merit you have, the more wealth you have, and it's exponential. The reason for that is merit, like so many other virtues, it's much more difficult to have more of it the more of it you have. And so accordingly, you get paid more in an exponential curve. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. But what do we have instead? We have this. We have it so that some of the people who have high merit also make a lot of money. Like maybe this is Elon Musk. He solved all these problems that the world hasn't solved, and he should be rewarded for the risks that he takes. Okay? I'm not claiming that that's not something that's worth something. It is. But here's a whole bunch of people who have a whole ton of merit, and they don't really make anything different from anyone else across the scale. Maybe the guy who fixes your car is 50 times better than the average mechanic. That's completely possible. He will absolutely not make 50 times the average mechanic's salary. Maybe you're a programmer and you're 50 times better than the average programmer. You'll be lucky if you make 3 times what an average programmer makes. That tops off very quickly. And then we go down to the bottom of the merit scale. Let's say that you've worked for the IRS for 40 years and you're a GS whatever, you're making tons of money, relatively speaking, and you're providing a service that actually makes the world a worse place, but also your job's not very hard. You do the same thing day in, day out, you have forever. You work from home and you take like 2 weeks to answer a letter, right? You log in, you check a couple of emails, and you go back to watching The Price is Right. So that's an unjust system. You know, you're a secretary and basically all you do is you write emails, but you're making $75K because you happen to work for a successful company. And so the merit there is the from the other people who work at this company, not you. You're just, interchangeable with any other secretary, and your job's going to get phased out by AI. But for right now, you're still making halfway decent money. That's not just. And we could go on and on with this, okay? But the point is there's a disconnect between merit and wealth in an unjust system. So here's one of the first takeaways. Modern money, like I said, it comes from fossil fuels and debt, government printing money. Modern money is fake. So I'm not saying energy is fake. Obviously, it's not. But it doesn't have to be used for what actually has worth. And most of the time, it's not. Modern money is fake, but what it buys doesn't have to be. That should be, doesn't have to be, not is not. It could be, but it doesn't have to be fake. So what's real wealth? What can you exchange fake money for that has real value? A lot of people out there will tell you, oh, buy precious metals, buy crypto, buy this, buy that. The number one thing that you can purchase with money, as far as value goes, is time. Time is the most important thing. Why? Because you can spend time on what actually has value. Why are we here? It's a pretty fundamental question. We are here to improve. We are here to improve ourselves and others. That's the reason. Well, you need time to do that. You might say, well, what about social entrepreneurship? You could build a business that helps people. Yeah, and hopefully there are a lot of businesses whose just normal products make life better. That doesn't have to be this overtly charitable purpose, right? You know, a paperclip makes life better. Just a regular business can make life better. Sure, absolutely. But if you want to increase meaning in life, it's going to diverge off of the profit motive. Those things are not one and the same. They're similar, they're related, but they're not the same. No one's going to pay you to sit in a room all day and improve yourself. You know, you could subdivide that and say, like, if you want to improve physically, maybe you could be an elite athlete. Sure, okay, and you might get sponsorship for that. Sure, okay. You might want to improve yourself intellectually, and you could be a writer, and then people would pay you for that. Okay. But in all these things, at the end of the day, someone else is telling you what has greatest value. If you're a pole vaulter, you don't get to decide that you're just going to train, you know, your back all day long beyond the direct application of how it makes you a better pole vaulter. You have to focus on the thing that's bringing in the money. Same thing for writing. Maybe you write one good book and it's about, you know, some story. It's a novel about a prince with magical powers or something, and the book's successful, and now you're stuck churning out sequels in this universe of this magical prince, and you might think, well, I want to write a story about an elephant. You don't get to, right? It doesn't matter if that's the greatest improvement. You see how they're different? And we could go on and on with other examples of this. Improvement is most important for yourself because that influences everything else. Second, your family. Third, your community. Fourth, the rest of the world. And that's the prioritization. That's what money can buy. You know, the Beatles said, money can't buy love, but it can buy improvement. It buys you time so that you can make yourself and others better. And time is one of other resources, because along the way, you're probably going to need other things, not just time. You need food, you need a place to live. You need ways to get the message out to make the difference. But there's a critical cohort within the set of all resources. It's food, shelter, and clothing. And it's not just you know, you could fill up a bin. It's not a one-time storage of these things. You could fill up a closet with clothes. You could fill up a bin with socks or something. You can have food stored up for the next year or two. That's not the limit of what I'm saying. The ability to sustainably produce this. I don't mean sustainable in an environmentalist way. I mean to continue to produce these things. And historically, surprise, this is what the first level of wealth consisted of. Building a family, building yourself, building a family, having some standing in your community. I don't mean recognition. I mean a place where you are positioned to help others. Having land, being able to produce food on that land, so the know-how to do that, and the equipment, whatever you need, the wherewithal, and the ability to produce clothing, a house to live in, right? But almost no one thinks of these things. You'll find a contingent of people, they tend to be Catholic, I'm not sure why, who were in the tech industry and have found ways to go remote, and maybe they're still working, maybe they've cashed out equity and they're totally off of that now. But they're buying homesteads in the middle of nowhere, and they're focusing on these things. Now, these are some of the smartest people in the world. They did really hard things and solved a lot of hard problems in ways that most people couldn't. And they're flush with way more money than most people have. And what are they choosing to do with those brains and that money? They're buying land in the middle of nowhere. They're having a bunch of kids, and they're homesteading. Now, why do you think that is? So going back to these graphs of merit and wealth, let me ask you, in these two systems, what are the differences? What are the differences in the global benefit? So however you wanted to define that benefit, if you could somehow magically total up the benefit in the entire world from these two systems, how do you think it would differ between them? So if we added up the height of these lines on the bottom graph and the area under the curve of the top graph, how would they differ? The top one would be massively greater. Massively greater. Why is that? Why is that? Well, I said you could define benefit any way you want, and I stand by that. But to understand it better, let's fix some particulars to this. We could talk about material wealth. How easy it is to put food on the table. Can you pay your utility bills? Do you have a car? Do you have the ability to put fuel in it and maintain it? Can you clothe yourself? Can you handle emergencies? Do you have health care? What about stability? How often do you move? What radical changes occur in your life? Do you find yourself suddenly out of work? If you do, how able are you to survive anyway through whatever means? What about peace? How much anxiety and depression do you think is in the top system, a just system, versus an unjust system? Do you think there's a difference? Why? What about meaning, which is obviously related to the former question? Do you think people on the top are more likely to find deep meaning in their lives, or the people in the unjust system? What about joy? I didn't put power on here. I'll define the word because I know there's some funky definitions of it today. Do you think it's easier or more difficult to obtain what you desire in a just system or an unjust system? And this is connected to something else on this list, which is mobility. So I was born poor. I was born in a family, and we didn't have any money. And I'm not poor now. Well, I guess technically I am, but I live in a nice house, and I'm able to. I am where I want to be in my life. We'll put it that way, as far as what I'm able to spend my time on each day. Okay? I'm not chained to 3 part-time jobs in a business that I don't care about. Okay? Well, that's mobility. I was able to go from a place where the normal thing would have been to inherit the situation of my parents and bootstrap out of poverty, attain a career in a difficult and rewarding field, several actually, and of course I was canceled from all of that, but now I am preaching the gospel full time. And isn't that great? And on that note, this channel and the books I write, everything that I do for about 70 hours a week in ministry each week is fully funded by contributions from people like you. And if that's something that you participate in, I thank you for it. It's something that's always needed. And if you're not participating in that and you find these things valuable, I sincerely ask you to consider making a monthly recurring donation. You can do that at upwardthought.org/donate. And what I request is something that reflects the value that you find in these materials up to the point that it doesn't displace anything more important in your life. So I thank you for doing that. So, and I apologize up front for having to say that again and again, but unfortunately, very few people respond to this request, and it's something that has to be said, or else we risk not being able to do this. Many people watch these videos, very few contribute. So I appreciate those who do. So back to the scheduled programming here. Who do you think has a greater motivation to do the right thing? People in a just society or people in an unjust society? And so you start to understand that these things matter quite a bit. And this is more than just some ephemeral undertone to the societal situation. This is deeply woven into the tapestry of how we live each day. I want to share with you something that I call the Eden rule. And I started developing this idea way back when I was a professor, and I had the dream of transitioning out of the research I was doing after I got tenure. I was going to spend my sabbatical finishing these books I had been collecting notes on with new ideas about complexity. And of course, that didn't happen with the cancellation. But one of the ideas from that material is what I call the Eden rule. And so you'll remember that in the Garden of Eden, God, quote unquote, cursed. It wasn't actually a curse. It was a blessing, but that's beyond the scope of this presentation. But God cursed Adam that he would obtain his daily bread through the sweat of his brow. You remember that? And so in a very deep way, the output of humanity, it's denominated in the physical labor that an able-bodied man can do in a day. And the case that I would make is it's also inherently limited to that. Now, if you're familiar at all with gardening in any way, and you understand that the vast majority of calories that we consume, either directly or indirectly through feeding cattle, come from grain, and you understand in at least a limited way the process of growing and processing grain from the raw item in the stalk to, say, flour, then you will understand that subsistence farming is an inherently impoverished lifestyle. It is dramatically labor intensive. So that's on the one hand, that's the bad news, right? If you look around you, almost nothing in your life could be sustained if you had to grow it with the labor of your own hands, or build it with your own hands. And I'm talking about from the dirt. I'm not saying like maybe you're an electrical engineer, if I threw a couple of electronics components, you could solder together a breadboard or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying if I put you on a piece of raw land in the wilderness and all you had was your body, what could you build? So, why does this matter? Because you're probably thinking, what is this? You're crazy talking. No. Think of everything beyond that as winding a spring. Maybe better put, think of everything beyond that as rubber banded to it. So imagine yourself on this raw piece of land and you've got all these rubber bands attaching you to the land. I know this is weird, but just bear with me. Every step of progress above that towards the modern, what we consider to be the modern situation, puts more and more tension on that rubber band. That tension doesn't go away. The rubber band never snaps. It's going to pull you back to that. And the further away you are, the more pressure there is, the more gravity there is pulling you back. Now, my point in bringing this up is that whatever we consider to be modern wealth, it's real, but it's also an illusion. You know, like you can go to the grocery store and fill your cart with groceries still. It's more expensive than it was a year ago or 5 years ago. But you can still do that. And you can eat all that food. And but some people would disagree that it's real food, but you know what I mean? There are calories. You can consume those, and it will fuel your body. So, Rob, how could you say that it's fake? It's mortgaged. It's mortgaged. Anything you don't deserve, think of it as a loan with a very high interest rate. There's a debt to be paid. It will pull you back. And it will pull you back with the velocity matching how far away you are from what you deserve. There are only two ways of escaping the Eden rule. The first is the only real way to do it. You establish a group of people who live a higher standard of righteousness. The idea with that is if you want sustainable blessings from God, you have to be a better person than you are. And in this case, it actually takes a group of people. One person isn't enough. And I won't get into reasons for why that is, but it is. The other way is what society offers us instead, which is the fake way. It's not actually successful in what it purports to be. It's a big old bait and switch. And that is, as you as an individual or as a group of people or even all of society, you do things that cause net loss in the long term. You live in ways that cause net loss in the long term. And somebody has to pay that bill. Now, can you live this way as an individual and not have to pay that bill in this life? Yes. In fact, as a generation, the boomers did that. And I'm not saying they were the first generation, but they'll probably be the last to live that way as a whole. It becomes more individual after that in subsequent generations. The problem is when the bill comes due. And what you get, what people call a rug pull, is when a system suddenly comes collapsing down because the bill comes due. There's a scripture about this in Alma 30:60. This is the end of the story of Korihor. So this guy went around preaching some really bad ideas that he got from Satan. And he knew they were bogus, but he just repeated them because it felt good. He liked the ideas, and people gave him fame and money for sharing them with them. But in the end, he died in a terrible way. He lost everything before he died. And the verse says, "And thus we see the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord. And thus we see that the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell." Satan will empower you to get away with certain things for as long as it takes to maximize the misery that you experience when he pulls the rug. And he's doing this globally. So God wants to generate the greatest global benefit, and Satan wants to generate the greatest global misery. And these are important things to understand. The bill always comes due. The principle is that what is contrary to God cannot endure. And so all these things that people see as good things are actually not good things. When we talk about economic decisions, you get the Dave Ramseys out there, live off of less than what you earn, invest everything into index funds, and at some point after you turn 45, you'll be a millionaire, right? So live frugally, invest what you save, and here's a really low risk thing that's extremely likely to pay off in a big way. Well, that was wonderful advice as far as individual results for maybe a 70-year span of time. It was really bad advice before that because you would have lost everything in the Great Depression. And it's really bad advice now. But there was a sweet spot for a few decades where that was great advice, and anyone who did that is a millionaire now. So what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with it is it won't work today. That's number one. Two, I should say it's less likely to work today. But two, the long-term consequences of this are bad. People complain all the time about this generation who did this. And they're really greedy people who have very little grip on reality. They tend to be super selfish. They're not interested in their kids or their grandkids. And they're going to spend every cent they earn before they die. And just live it up. They've been married 4 times, they're very selfish people. That's on a whole, it's not everybody, obviously. But those consequences came from getting a whole bunch of money that was detached from merit. Now, does that mean they shouldn't have done that? No, that was a smart thing to do from the individual perspective. If someone didn't do that, it's not like the world would be a better place. If one person didn't do that. This is one of these tragedies of the commons situations, right? Everyone would have to opt out of that to make a difference. But it's unsustainable. What do I mean by that? Well, the stock market is a Ponzi scheme. And I should say the modern stock market. And it has been fueled by cheap energy and debt. The money that the government prints ends up on the stock market. And it's way more complicated than that, but that if you have to boil it down to a little blip, that's it. Little bullet. And that's not sustainable. Every single fiat currency ends the same exact way. It collapses. And like most collapse, it's not just a sudden thing. It's a process. The dollar has lost something like 98% of its value since the inception of the Federal Reserve. You start printing money, the value of the currency goes down, and it just keeps going. And the more debt we have, the less valuable it becomes. It's unsustainable. Now, it's unsustainable in 2 ways, at least. One, if the currency becomes less and less valuable, then that offsets any increase in the market. But 2, eventually, it's all going to come down. And so it's not sustainable. It's like injecting heroin. You get a lower and lower high the more and more you use it. And it takes more of the drug to produce the same results. And eventually you just get in this death spiral where it's not possible to get the same high, no matter how much you inject. And then you kill yourself. That's how this works. All right. Well, here's a more modern thing. There are people out there playing the game of roulette, and, they decided to spare themselves a few avocado toasts or $7 coffees, and they have a life savings of about $675, and they throw it into a few random meme coins, which are these dime a dozen cryptocurrencies that spin up every day. And some of them will go up by 1,000%. And some people win the lottery because it goes up by a lot, and then they sell it, and then now they have a bunch more cash. This is no different than some scratch-off lottery ticket. The difference is that there are a lot more people today that will fall for this than scratch-off lottery tickets. And a lot of young people, they don't know any better because they've grown up in a system completely disconnected from reality. And this happens every day. It's not sustainable. Again, it's just a lottery. That's not a strategy to build wealth in your life. Oh, I'm going to play the lottery every day until I win. And then you've got the extremities of this. You have people who have worked and accumulated wealth in the traditional ways, who are liquidating that and throwing it all into something like Bitcoin. There's a family that got famous a couple of years ago because they sold their house, they put everything into Bitcoin. You got people out there hawking this, charging people by the hour to give them quote unquote wealth building advice. And they've got all kinds of little sound bites. Bitcoin's a battery, it stores wealth, blah, 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 right? I've heard people say things like, oh, you just fight your way to get one Bitcoin. You're going to pass down generational wealth to your kids, or you're going to be the new robber barons. I don't want to get into all the details of Bitcoin. My background's computer science. I know about the technicals on it. I understand that. There is technology behind it. Yeah, there's something called the blockchain. There's math. But it is not what it purports to be. It is way overblown. It's absolutely a Ponzi scheme. And it will probably never go to zero until the lights go out. But people are going to lose a buttload of money on this. Okay? Does that mean you can't make money in it in the meantime? No. It's just another example of picking up change in front of a steamroller. It's not sustainable. Could you sell your house, throw it into something like this, whatever it is, and double, triple, quadruple your money? Yeah, it's totally possible. But the only way to do it is by making a chain of very irrational decisions. I saw a guy bragging on social media, I've been telling you about Bitcoin forever and blah, 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 and it ramped after Trump got elected. Yeah, well, guess what would have happened if Harris got elected? It would have collapsed. And there are reasons for that, and I need to shorten this video. We're dragging on way too long here. Okay? It would have collapsed. So what you're saying is, I won the lottery, man. You should have bought a ticket too. If people apply that principle, to test an idea, you need to abstract the principle and then cross-test it on other applications. That's one way of testing how valuable an idea is how high up the idea hierarchy can it go and still pass the test. And if it doesn't pass, at best, you're in a local maximum. So with this idea, if you abstract the principle and apply it to other things in your life, it's disastrously bad. And it's very obvious. You just think about it for 5 seconds and it's obvious, right? But what people do is they look at folks who won the lottery and they're like, yeah, well, maybe I should buy a ticket. It doesn't change the math. So in a nutshell, the world's prosperity today is in spite of justice. And it is not sustainable. It will come undone. God's prosperity, on the other hand, it's because of justice. And even if they're temporary, so with the world's prosperity, even if there are temporary blips upward in wealth, it's always going to come down. And when it does, there will be nothing else remaining. But God's prosperity is the reverse. It doesn't matter how bad it gets. You're always going to have something much more valuable, which primarily is more of God's character in you. Okay? But secondarily, it's his promise because he is just. And in the long run, everyone gets what they deserve in the eternal span of time. And this is very important. So we're narrowing in on the point, okay? And we're almost through here. Do you understand what the societal implications of modern prosperity are? Do you know what it does to global benefit? It's going to make everyone poorer. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. We've seen blips of it. We've seen blips where, with the Russia-Ukraine war, for example, when that broke out, there were famines in the developing world because that food, the global debt was buying food out of Ukraine for poor regions in the world. And it all dried up overnight. And you had places like Egypt that could grow food if they wanted to, but they had rerouted the ability to do that, the resources for it, into other things. Because they thought, well, we can get grain, we can buy it cheaper than we can grow it. So let's just buy it from Ukraine. The United States does that. California grows like 97% of the vegetables in this country that are purchased in the store and grown in the States. Well, what happens when that can't be done anymore? Well, all the other farms the resources that rerouted into other more profitable things are revealed to be a short-term optimal but long-term suboptimal decision. See how that works? What happens to material wealth with modern prosperity? It goes down. I made a video on this. I don't know when it's going to come out. Have you seen these tiny houses? I don't mean the tiny houses on wheels. I mean like houses that are being put up in subdivisions that are basically apartments. They're these narrow little things. They're like the size of a shipping container, but they have all the trappings of a normal house, just really small. What's happening to material wealth? Young people can't afford to buy a car. People can't afford to have kids. Where does that come from? That's the consequence. Stability. How many industries are losing their jobs? It's happening left and right. Peace. Have you seen charts on depression and anxiety, on suicide? What about meaning? There's a crisis of meaning. Even wealthy people are complaining about the lack of meaning in life. The people have won the race, allegedly. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. What about joy? Do you think people are happier today? We know they're not. It's been measured. So, earlier when I was ranting about being rubber banded to a subsistence farm, when I was talking about being rubber banded to a piece of raw land, you probably thought that was crazy. We have been subjected to the largest bait and switch in the history of mankind, where we think that having an iPhone in our hands is worth what we traded for it. But on all the things that actually matter, on happiness, on meaning, on peace, on stability, and increasingly in all the things we traded it for, namely material wealth, increasingly the cost is so much higher than the benefit. And we would be better off in a subsistence farming community than we are here and now. Now, there will be an enormous amount of pushback on that comment. And I understand that. And I don't have time to make the case. That's not the point of this video. I will get to that at a different time. But just look at the things that we can measure. Is there greater motivation to do the right thing under modern prosperity? Definitely not. What's happening to crime? It's not only increasing, but people don't even care anymore. It's getting worse in frequency and intensity, and also there's a decaying reaction. People are actually cheering criminals in many cases. There are statues of criminals, and it's going to get worse. Now, what about mobility? We have inverse mobility. It's a race to the bottom. It used to be, if you were born in a middle-class family, you had to do something very wrong to mess that up. You had to get on drugs or something, right? And poor kids like me had a pathway to bootstrap out of that. It was a choice. Being poor was a choice. Now it's still a choice, but increasingly it's less of a choice, and it takes way more to get as far out of that than before. And most children of middle-class families are going to have a very broke life. They're going to be broke for their whole lives. And you see this. If you got a 9-10-year-old at home, the odds that person will ever own their own home are basically zero. The odds that they will ever own their own car are declining towards zero. Think about that. That's crazy. But it's true. All right. Well, now let's call on Thomas Jefferson for a quote here to see that these ideas aren't new. They've just been disregarded. He said, "All the capital employed in paper speculation is barren and useless, producing, like that on a gaming table, no accession to itself, and is withdrawn from commerce and agriculture, where it would have produced addition to the common mass it nourishes in our citizens, habits of vice and idleness, instead of industry and morality. It has furnished effectual means of corrupting such a portion of the legislature as turns the balance between the honest voters, whichever way it is directed." Now, our society has been sufficiently dumbed down that probably went over your head. I don't mean that as an insult to you. It's just, it's kind of like how, well, I won't get into that. Anyway, but back in Thomas Jefferson's day, what happened was the debts from the Revolution, some unscrupulous characters decided that they wanted to buy up all the debts from the Revolution and essentially resell them at a much higher price, using the government as the agent to do that. And the way they did that was through paper currency. And so paper currency is easier to inflate than precious metals. And so that was the scheme. And what Jefferson said was that speculation on currency, on fiat currency, it produced poor qualities in society. And one of the problems, he said, was that once you've experienced this massive gain through speculation, so independent of merit, it's very hard to find meaning in the jobs that normal people have to work. It's no different than during COVID, when the government started paying people to not go to work. It crashed the value that they found in work. And let me ask you, has that been recovered? Are people happy with going to work again? Is it easier or harder to get young people to take entry-level jobs than it was before COVID? Well, there you have it. So what happens when someone invests their $200 in life savings into a meme coin and comes out of it with $2 million? Just the other day, this happened with this new Trump cryptocurrency. And people that got in on it in the first 2 hours, they made like 5,000% return within 24 hours. There's stories all over the place of people throwing in $1,000 and they came out millionaires. What do you think that does for the meaning associated with normal life? Well, it totally kills it. It totally kills it. And what does that do for society? It corrodes it rapidly, right? So let me share with you some tweets that I've collected on this topic. Here's one. This guy says, basically, if you're honest, the system is against you. The system only benefits liars who fake everything. Now let me ask you this. How many people have to believe this before everything comes crashing down? So you might say, well, believing this doesn't mean that people want to participate in it. They might fight the system and do the right thing in spite of the system. Let me tell you, the set of people who will do the right thing against the current, it's like 1% tops. And even those people will only do the right thing in some cases. They won't do it all the time. This is very, very, very bad. That there are people out there saying these things and thousands of folks are agreeing with them. It's very, very bad. You don't go and risk everything and work against the grain and do much more than everyone you know if you don't think that there's a really good chance of you being compensated for that. You take away those high performers and society collapses very quickly. Here's another one. This lady says, in 2022, we bought a rental property. Pause. What does this tell you about this lady? How normal is it for someone to buy a rental? You have to scrape and save for that. That's not something that you just go and do, right? So here's a person who's oriented towards living at less than her means and putting away and risking to make things better in the future. Let's continue the quote. We put 20% down and $50,000 into renovations. At the time, Bitcoin was $20,000. If we would have put that $50,000 into Bitcoin at 20K, we'd have 2.5 coins, and today those would be worth $247,000. Hindsight is 2020. Smiley. How many people, so we're talking about a very small percentage of the population who scrimps and saves to buy rentals, okay? Who has $50,000 to put into renovations on top of 20% down. How many of those people need to start thinking that they should just throw their money into cryptocurrency and get money for nothing and your chicks for free before society collapses? You think it's hard to get affordable housing now? Just wait until would-be real estate investors, I'm talking small mom and pop types, are just dumping their money into cryptocurrency. And then, if that's not bad enough, what happens when the crypto goes south and billions of dollars just evaporate in thin air? Now you don't have crypto, you don't have middle-class people, and you don't have rentals. You see how that works? Here's one. This was a video. But this guy says, me seeing a crypto guy making $310,000 from $800 in 15 minutes with Trump coin while I wake up at 6 a.m. to go to work. See, I'm not making this up. People are doing the value comparisons and they're talking about it. Normal people are making these calculations and they're talking about it. You know, why doesn't that lady want to get a job at Wendy's? Because she can make just as much money on OnlyFans 10 minutes a week. And she doesn't care that she's prostituting herself. Why does that guy not want to work at Panda Express? Because he can go on social media and see people turning $800 into $310,000. So why should he be the guy that has to work? Here's an interesting one. This guy says, I make about $200,000 per year. I live pretty comfortably, decent neighborhood, drive a new but boring car, eat good food from Whole Foods, and my job's pretty good, not gonna lie. Am I supposed to feel like this is enough and I have no reason to start a company? Is it normal to feel like this is not enough? Should I quit and start a company? So, starting a company aside, which is a terrible idea for most people, there are stories on top of stories of people who make good money. I've seen amounts much higher than this, who publicly say that they have no meaning in life. And they feel like they should feel really good for where they are, but they're not happy at all. Why? I don't know what this person does for a living, but I can tell you that it's worthless. It only gives them money, and they have nothing to translate. They don't know how to translate that money into meaning. All they do is go to work and have fringe benefits, a nice car. They go to the gym, they eat food. Whoopity-doo, right? Most of these people, in the comments, you'll see people say, do you have any kids? And they're like, nope. And if it's a woman, she'll probably say, I'm too old now. But the guys also are too old to find women young enough to have kids because of the societal, and this is also new, this aversion to age gaps. All right, so enough of the tweets. We've been through all this. We see the effects. So what's the remedy? Well, you need to start making changes so that your work is more just. What is just work? It means that you provide benefit that exceeds your cost. And it also means that you translate the money you make into meaning. So, applying the filter of providing benefit that exceeds your cost rules out a lot of modern jobs. Now, the specific jobs, we'd have to shadow people at work to make that judgment call. But there are entire professions that this rules out. There are entire professions. The lady, a specific job we can pick on, the mayor of Los Angeles or the fire chief of Los Angeles. I think the fire chief was making close to $1 million, more than $750,000 a year in pay. But the reservoirs were empty, fire hydrants were empty, and the whole town burned down. Obviously, she was not providing benefit that exceeded her cost. Okay? But what about entire professions? I'll leave that to you because I think it'll be really offensive if I share that one. But there are entire professions that don't provide the benefit that they cost. And then we talked about converting that into real wealth. Because real wealth is not money. It's what you spend the money on that provides meaning. You don't find that in get-rich-quick schemes like these people who suddenly get rich on crypto, or even in slightly less quick get-rich schemes. I saw a post from a guy, he got a job at a big tech company and worked really hard for 10 years, 15 years, did all the things, and he's got a net worth of like $50 million now, even though he's a totally normal guy, not an executive or anything, and no meaning in life. Complaining about it. What should I do now? Well, here's a recommendation. Have some kids. Have some kids. Now, if you've trained yourself for years and years of your adult life to be a narcissist, that's going to be really hard. And it's probably not a good idea to have kids because you're just going to give them a terrible life and make them into psychopaths. But having kids is designed as a really low, I don't want to say low cost, a really high likelihood of return on investment source of meaning in life. It wasn't said well, but it's designed to be a quasi-automatic source of high meaning in life. Now, you can probably figure out how to have kids on your own. That's my second make babies joke in this presentation. But one thing I would advise you to do is to not fall prey to this trap of thinking that good parenting consists of the degree of entertainment that you can enable for your children. That's not going to provide you with meaning. In fact, that's guaranteed to rob you of meaning when you see them become terrible people as adults and you reflect on how much of that is your fault. What I advise you to do is make changes to spend more time with them in ways that actually benefit them, that actually improve them and increase their ability to improve others. Now we're coming full circle to where we started. The purpose of life is improvement. Now, something I could help you figure out how to do better is growing your own food. That one's a little less natural, in some ways at least. An ease to figure out how to do it at least. Okay? But what I would advise you to do, and I've said a lot about this in other videos, is to get into a land situation that makes it more possible and productive to grow food, to grow more food. And the meaning that this will provide in your life you will be shocked. You will be shocked at how much of the good things we listed here, material wealth as food gets more expensive, stability. If you know that say that your house is paid off and you're in a low property tax area, or you've somehow put your house into a foundation or something and gotten out of property tax, it's a wonderful thing to investigate. But you know that you can grow your own food and your house is paid off. What kind of stability is that? That's real wealth. You know, some of the uber rich lost everything in these LA fires. Do you think they feel stable? They're rich. They're filthy rich. But do you think they feel stable? What about peace? You might be surprised to learn how much peace you can get out of working with the soil and raising animals, growing your own food. What about meaning and joy? Again, you might be surprised how much you get out of homesteading. All right, so those are the shortcuts I have for you. It's not exactly a get-rich-quick scheme, but that's how to get a massive amount of meaning out of your life is have kids and grow your own food, okay? Or more of your own food. Here's, again, Thomas Jefferson on the topic. Agriculture is our wisest pursuit because it will, in the end, contribute most to real wealth, good morals, and happiness. See, you thought I was just some crazy dude giving you crazy ideas, but I'm in good company. The wealth acquired by speculation and plunder is fugacious. There's a nice word for you. Fugacious in its nature, and fills society with the spirit of gambling. The moderate and sure income of husbandry, that's farming, begets permanent improvement, quiet life, and orderly conduct, both in public and private. Did you know that both Jefferson and Washington mourned every day they had to spend in public office because they both preferred to be at home on their farm? Now, these are two of the wisest men who've ever graced this nation. Why do you think that they preferred their farm? So here we have it. Surprise, right? Now, this is a particularly long video, and I think we're probably going to lose a particularly high number of people. So I will gift you with a little nugget here. I'm putting my cards on the table as fast as I can. I just wrote a blog post about how I don't have secrets in this ministry. Some people, I guess some guy thought I had secret books that I haven't published. I have books that aren't finished yet. I don't have secret books. I don't have secret anything. Okay? But there is a limit in how much I can tell you. But that's not because of me. I mean, I'm limited in the time it takes to put these things into words, of course. And I'm pushing that limit by doing this about 70 hours a week. I don't have more I can cut away from my family or my sleep. Just last night, I got up at 11:30 p.m. It's 4 a.m. right now. I've been doing ministry since 11:30 last night. Okay? I don't have more time that I can manufacture. But I'm also limited by people's ability to receive these things. The more videos I make, there's a limit. The reason that you get a video every other day is because if there are more, less people will watch. I've tested it. So I've got videos queued up for months. They're already done. They're already uploaded. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, there would still be videos for the next 6 months, every other day. So part of that limit is I can only express things so far in the time given. But I'm trying to push out as much as I can, as fast as I can. And these ideas tend to have benefits that far exceed what I'm able to express in the moment. And getting onto a rural homestead is one of these ideas. And in this video, we took a ton of time to lay out some of these benefits, which Thomas Jefferson put so succinctly into this quote. And more benefits will be shown to you over time. And so I really hope that you're listening and that you're making changes to shift out into the country. There are a lot of other things to think about with that, but you're going to see tons of benefits, especially if you either don't have kids yet or those kids are still young. All right, but here's my closing remark. I encourage you to live for justice. What I mean by that is live so that you deserve wealth, whether you presently have it or not. This is an immense key to peace. It gives you great power in your prayers to God. You can live in such a way that any afflictions, any financial afflictions that you face, or temporal afflictions in terms of like danger of losing your house, or you've lost your job, or whatever, you can pray to God and have confidence that He hears your prayer and that He instantly initiates its fulfillment. I had to say that carefully. A lot of things are a process, but to live in a way where your simple but sincere prayer is instantly answered by God. Can you put a price on that? And one of the ways to get there in the temporal realm of things, as far as having a house to live in, having food to eat, having a job, having a way to earn money. Live so that you deserve wealth, whether you have it or not. Don't look for shortcuts. Live so that you understand true wealth, because it's not about the money you make, it's about what you spend it on. Don't seek to be free from toil. Seek to maximize meaning. Maximize your contribution to the benefit of the world. That's what you should be trying to maximize. And again, it comes back to improving yourself and improving other people. So I hope that several things from this presentation have stood out to you and give you specific ideas on things you can change to make your life better and make the lives of those around you better. So thanks for joining.